At 17, she was sold, still innocent, to a lonely cowboy twice her age. No one expected the ending. Emily had always lived in a small, quiet town surrounded by wide fields and dusty roads, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and news traveled fast, sometimes too fast. She was only 17, just on the edge of adulthood, with a mind full of dreams and a heart full of hope. Life had not been easy for her family. Her father worked long hours at the local mill, barely earning enough to feed them, while her mother stitched clothes for neighbors and took care of Emily and her younger brother. Despite their struggles, Emily's home was filled with warmth, laughter, and love, though it often felt fragile under the weight of bills and worry. From a young age, Emily had been taught the importance of helping others, of being kind even when life was harsh. She would often walk to the market with her mother, carrying baskets of vegetables to sell, or help her father repair fences and tend to the few animals they had. She was hard-working, careful, and gentle, never asking for much for herself. But as she grew older, she also began to notice that the world could be unfair. Sometimes kind people were overlooked, while those who took advantage of others seemed to thrive. One afternoon, while Emily was walking home from the market, she noticed a man on horseback riding slowly along the dusty road. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the sun catching the worn lines on his face. His eyes seemed tired, yet they held a quiet loneliness. Emily felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. People in her town whispered stories about him, a cowboy who lived alone on the edge of town, quiet and distant, who had few visitors. Some said he was kind, others that he was harsh. Emily didn't know what to believe, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this man was important somehow, even if she didn't know why. Over the next few weeks, he began visiting her family occasionally. At first, it was small gestures, helping her father repair a fence, fixing the roof after a storm, or bringing gifts of fruit and vegetables. Emily's parents were grateful, feeling that maybe, just maybe, this man could be a source of support. Emily noticed how he seemed to look out for her younger brother and how he spoke politely, almost gently, to her mother. But she also noticed the quiet intensity in his gaze when he looked at her. It was not frightening, but it made her heart beat faster, as if something unspoken lingered between them. One evening, after a long day of chores, Emily's mother pulled her aside. "Emily," she said softly, "this man, he has offered to help us."
He wants to make sure we have enough food and supplies. All he asks is,
"Well, he asks if you could live with him for a while. It would only be temporary, and it would make things much easier for us."
Emily froze. The idea seemed impossible. Live with a man she barely knew? Alone? Her mind raced with questions, fear, and confusion. But then she saw the worry in her mother's eyes, the silent pleading in her father's expression. But they were desperate. They had no money, no support. Emily realized that sometimes survival required difficult choices, choices that could feel impossible. She tried to imagine life at the ranch. She pictured the wide fields, the horses, the quiet mornings and long nights. Maybe she could learn new skills, help with the animals, and make her family's burden a little lighter. Maybe she could find kindness there. And so, with a heavy heart and trembling hands, Emily agreed. The first day at the ranch was overwhelming. The house was large, more than she had ever seen, with creaking wooden floors and windows that framed endless fields. The cowboy, whose name she learned was Jacob, showed her around. He was polite, never harsh, but there was a weight in the air, a sense of authority and distance that made Emily careful with her words and actions. She quickly realized that this was not her home. Not yet. She was a guest, but one under his rules. Days turned into weeks, and Emily slowly adjusted to the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to feed the animals, clean the barn, and ride the horses with surprising skill. Jacob, though distant, occasionally offered advice and guidance, teaching her how to mend fences and care for livestock. Emily began to see that he was not just a loner. He had a wealth of knowledge and experience, and in some moments, he seemed almost protective. She felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe this arrangement could be more than just survival. It could be learning, growth, and understanding. But there was always a quiet tension. Emily was aware that she was far from home, in a place where she depended on someone she barely knew. She missed her family, the familiar sounds of her town, and the warmth of her parents' hugs. Loneliness sometimes pressed against her chest like a heavy stone. At night, she would look out the window at the wide, empty fields, imagining her parents sleeping in their small home, worrying about her, hoping she was safe. Despite the fear and uncertainty, Emily's spirit began to grow stronger. She realized that she could not let herself feel powerless. She learned to read Jacob's moods, to anticipate his expectations, and to navigate the unspoken rules of the ranch. She discovered that her own courage and intelligence were her greatest tools, and quietly she promised herself that no matter what happened, she would protect her heart, stay true to herself, and find a way to a future that was hers alone. Friends from town would occasionally visit, bringing letters and small gifts. Each time, Emily felt a surge of hope, a reminder that she was not entirely alone. She cherished these moments, storing them in her memory like precious treasure. And though the days were long and sometimes frightening, Emily began to see that life was not just about enduring hardship. It was about learning, growing, and finding strength in unexpected places. Emily's story in those early days at the ranch was one of quiet observation and inner reflection. She watched the animals, listened to the wind through the trees, and learned the subtle rhythms of the land. She saw how Jacob cared for the ranch with dedication and pride, and though she did not yet fully understand him, she began to appreciate the complexity of the man who had become such an unexpected part of her life. And so, at 17, Emily found herself in a strange, new world, one filled with challenge and uncertainty, but also with opportunity. She was still innocent, still learning about the vastness of life and the depth of human complexity. But already, even in those first weeks, the seeds of resilience were planted. Emily was beginning a journey that would test her courage, her intelligence, and her heart, one that no one in her small town could have imagined, and one that would lead to an ending no one expected. Life at the ranch settled into a quiet routine, though it was far from easy. Emily rose each morning before the sun, the soft light barely touching the horizon as she stepped out into the cold morning air. The smell of hay, horses, and earth was everywhere, a new world she had to navigate with careful steps. She learned quickly that life on a ranch was not about comfort. It was about responsibility, timing, and endurance. Every day had tasks that demanded attention: feeding the animals, cleaning stalls, mending fences, and helping Jacob with chores he could no longer manage alone. Emily was determined to do her best, knowing that her family back home depended on her safety and well-being. At first, the work seemed endless. Her muscles ached from tasks she had never done before, and the early mornings made her eyelids heavy. But with every chore, she discovered a hidden satisfaction. There was a rhythm in the work, a simple sense of accomplishment that she had not known before. Emily found herself learning skills she never imagined she could master. She could saddle a horse, mend broken fences, and even help with the horse's injuries when needed. Jacob watched her carefully, sometimes giving instructions in his quiet, deliberate way, and other times allowing her to figure things out on her own. He was not cruel, but he was strict and commanding, with a quiet authority that Emily had to respect. His manner was calm, yet always observant, and Emily soon realized that he noticed every detail: how she moved, how she handled tasks, and how she responded to his words. She learned to anticipate his expectations, which made her more confident in some ways, but also more aware of the power he held over her daily life. There were moments when he showed unexpected kindness, like offering her extra blankets during cold nights or bringing fresh eggs from the henhouse. These small gestures were confusing for Emily. They were gentle, but they reminded her of how alone she truly was in this vast ranch. Despite the growing familiarity with the work, Emily often felt the weight of isolation. Evenings were the hardest. The house was large and echoing, and the silence seemed to stretch endlessly. The wind would whistle through cracks in the windows, carrying the sounds of the open fields. Emily would sit by the fireplace, hands wrapped around a warm mug, thinking of her family back home. She missed her mother's laughter, her father's reassuring words, and the sound of her younger brother running through the garden. Letters from friends in town were a small comfort, but they could not fill the emptiness of being away from everything familiar. In those quiet moments, Emily began to reflect on her situation more deeply. She realized that she had been thrust into a world far different from the one she knew. Here, every action had consequences, every word mattered, and every decision could affect her safety and her future. At first, fear often took hold of her, making her doubt her own abilities. But slowly she noticed something else growing inside her, a quiet determination, a spark of resilience she had never fully recognized. She began to understand that while she could not control everything, she could control her attitude, her choices, and the way she approached each day. As she grew more confident in her work, Emily also began to observe Jacob closely. She noticed that beneath his tough exterior, he carried a deep sense of loneliness. He spoke little about his past, and when he did, it was in fragments, brief and measured. Sometimes he would look out across the fields for long moments, as if searching for something lost or unreachable. Emily began to understand that he was not a simple man, but someone shaped by life in ways she could only guess. She did not always understand him, and she did not always agree with his methods, but she began to recognize the complexity in human behavior, the shades of light and shadow that could exist in a person. One afternoon, while feeding the horses, Emily noticed that one of the younger animals was limping. She remembered a technique she had read about in a book she had brought from home, and carefully applied it. Jacob watched silently at first, then nodded in approval when he saw the horse recover enough to walk steadily again. "Good work," he said, his voice low but sincere. Emily felt a surge of pride. For the first time, she realized that she was capable, not just surviving, but contributing in meaningful ways. That day, she carried herself with a newfound confidence, though she remained aware that every day still required careful navigation. Evenings often brought a mix of anxiety and reflection. Emily would sit on the porch, listening to the crickets and the wind, her mind wandering through memories of her old life. She thought about the friends she had left behind, the school she had barely finished, and the dreams she had once held. But she also thought about her present, about the life she was building on the ranch, and about the small victories that showed her strength. She realized that courage was not just about grand gestures. It was about persistence, awareness, and the willingness to face each day despite fear. One day, a young woman named Clara, who lived a few miles away, came to visit. Clara was kind and observant, and she immediately noticed Emily's quiet intelligence and skill. Over time, they became friends, talking in whispered conversations when Jacob was away tending the fields. Clara encouraged Emily to think about her future, about her independence, and about the possibilities beyond the ranch. These conversations were liberating. For the first time, Emily realized that her life did not have to be defined solely by her circumstances. She could learn, grow, and make choices that would shape her destiny. Emily's friendship with Clara also helped her understand the importance of community and connection. She learned that even in a situation where she felt isolated, there were people who cared, people who could offer guidance and support. This realization strengthened her resolve. She began to plan carefully, thinking about ways to ensure her safety while also gaining the skills and knowledge she would need for the future. Each day, she became more adept at balancing her work, her survival, and her inner life. Despite the challenges, Emily also began to notice subtle changes in herself. She was becoming more confident, more capable, and more aware of her own worth. She started to understand the balance between caution and courage, learning when to speak up and when to observe quietly. She discovered a sense of resourcefulness she had never recognized before, finding ways to solve problems and navigate challenges with intelligence and grace. Jacob, though still distant, began to respect her growing competence. He occasionally asked for her opinion on ranch matters, or allowed her to take the lead in small projects. Emily noticed that his approval came slowly, but when it did, it was sincere. She realized that while he held authority, he also recognized skill and effort. This acknowledgement, though small, fueled her determination to continue learning and growing. As weeks turned into months, Emily's understanding of life on the ranch deepened. She saw the beauty in the wide fields, the satisfaction in tending to animals, and the importance of patience and observation. She also became acutely aware of the fragility of trust and the value of self-reliance. While she was still dependent in many ways, she had begun to build an inner strength that would carry her through the most challenging moments yet to come. Emily's days were not without fear and tension, but they were also filled with growth, learning, and small victories. She realized that life could be both challenging and rewarding, harsh and kind, all at the same time. And most importantly, she began to understand that she had the power to shape her own path, even within the constraints of the ranch. By the end of the second part of her journey, Emily had transformed from a frightened, uncertain girl into a young woman with quiet strength and determination. She had learned skills that made her useful and respected, observed human nature with insight, and cultivated a network of support and friendship. Most importantly, she had begun to recognize her own resilience, her ability to endure hardship, and the courage that would guide her through the turning points still ahead. The days at the ranch had grown longer and more predictable, but Emily could feel a subtle tension building beneath the surface. Life there was not dangerous in the way she had feared, but it was controlled, ordered, and isolating. She had learned to navigate her chores, to anticipate Jacob's expectations, and to find small joys in the work she did each day. Yet, despite these accomplishments, a quiet unease often lingered in her mind, a whisper that reminded her she was not entirely free to make her own choices. Emily's friendship with Clara continued to grow, and with it came a new perspective on her life. Clara was confident, clever, and perceptive, with a keen understanding of people and the way the world worked. During their visits, she would gently ask questions that made Emily think, questions like, "Do you ever wonder if there's more for you beyond the ranch? Or have you thought about what you want for yourself?" At first, Emily brushed these questions aside, unsure if she could even imagine a life outside the ranch. But slowly they planted seeds of possibility in her mind, ideas that grew quietly, forming the beginnings of a plan. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Emily helped Jacob repair a fence along the eastern pasture. The work was physically demanding, but it allowed her mind to wander. She thought about the letters from friends back home, about the warm evenings with her family, and about the moments of laughter she had once taken for granted. She realized how much she had missed, not just the people, but the freedom to make her own decisions, to move through the world without being constantly observed. For the first time, she felt a deep yearning for independence, a recognition that life could be different if she chose to make it so. Jacob, as always, was attentive to her movements, his presence both reassuring and unnerving. He rarely spoke unnecessarily, but when he did, his words carried weight. Emily had learned to read his moods, to anticipate his instructions, and to move carefully in his world. But she had also learned to observe him, to notice the patterns in his behavior, the moments of softness that hinted at his humanity beneath the stern exterior. These observations were not always comforting, but they gave her insight that would become crucial in the days to come. It was during one of Clara's visits that the turning point began to take shape. Clara had noticed the careful way Emily moved through the ranch, the way she balanced obedience with subtle independence, and the quiet intelligence that guided her decisions. One afternoon, sitting beneath a large oak tree, Clara spoke softly. "Emily, you are stronger than you realize. You have a mind that can solve problems, and a heart that can endure. You need to trust yourself, even when it feels like no one else does." Emily listened, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe Clara's words, but doubt crept in. Could she really make a change in her life? Could she find a way to be free without putting herself or her family at risk? The questions were overwhelming, but for the first time, she felt a spark of determination. Perhaps she thought she could find a way to take control of her own future, one careful step at a time. The days following that conversation were filled with quiet observation and subtle experimentation. Emily began to test her own limits, to see how much she could accomplish without drawing unnecessary attention. She learned to notice small details, how the animals behaved, how Jacob reacted to different situations, and how the landscape of the ranch could be used to her advantage. Each discovery added to her confidence, building a sense of agency she had never felt before. One afternoon, while gathering eggs from the henhouse, Emily discovered a hidden skill she had not realized she possessed: patience. She noticed patterns in the chickens' movements, the timing of their nesting, and the safest way to collect the eggs without startling them. This small victory seemed insignificant, but to Emily, it was profound. She realized that mastery over small tasks could lead to mastery over larger challenges. If she could learn patience, observation, and strategy with chickens, perhaps she could apply those same skills to her own life. Jacob began to notice changes in Emily as well. He observed her increased confidence, her ability to handle tasks independently, and the subtle intelligence in her decisions. Though he rarely praised openly, he offered her more responsibility, trusting her to manage portions of the ranch on her own. This trust was not just a reward. It was a sign that he respected her abilities, even if he did not fully understand the growing resolve within her. Emily took these moments as encouragement, feeling a sense of pride that strengthened her resolve to remain vigilant, thoughtful, and prepared for the challenges ahead. During this time, Emily also began to notice the deeper rhythms of life at the ranch, the patterns of the animals, the changes in the weather, and the small routines that kept the property running smoothly. She started keeping a mental map of the ranch, noting which areas were secluded, which paths were most frequently traveled, and where she could find quiet moments of reflection. This awareness was not born out of fear alone, but out of a growing understanding that knowledge and observation were tools she could use to maintain control over her own situation. One day, while fetching water from the well, Emily overheard a conversation between Jacob and a neighboring rancher. The rancher was speaking casually about the difficulties of managing workers and the importance of responsibility, While Jacob responded in his usual measured tone, Emily realized that even though she felt isolated at times, she was not entirely powerless. She had learned skills, built trust, and gained insight into human behavior. She could use these tools to protect herself, to anticipate problems, and to plan for a future that belonged to her, rather than one dictated solely by others. That evening, after Jacob had retired to his room and the stars had begun to shine over the wide fields, Emily sat quietly in the living room, reflecting on everything she had learned. She realized that courage was not about recklessness. It was about careful planning, awareness, and perseverance. She understood that her strength came not from defiance, but from observation, adaptability, and a deep knowledge of herself. For the first time, she truly felt the power of her own mind, the ability to influence her circumstances, and the hope that she could shape her future. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to act on this newfound understanding. She continued her chores diligently, maintaining the appearance of obedience, but she also began to explore the boundaries of her environment. She found safe spaces where she could think and plan, and she started to consider practical steps for eventual independence. She knew that rushing or revealing her intentions prematurely could be dangerous, so she moved quietly, observing, learning, and building her confidence one careful step at a time. Her friendship with Clara remained a vital support. Through their conversations, Emily began to imagine life beyond the ranch, not as a vague dream, but as a tangible goal. She visualized a future in which she could study, work, and live safely and independently, using the skills she had acquired to create a meaningful life. This vision gave her a sense of purpose, transforming her fear into determination and her anxiety into focused energy. Emily also began to recognize the duality in Jacob's behavior. While he was often stern and controlling, he was also capable of kindness and fairness. This understanding allowed her to navigate her interactions with him more effectively. She learned when to speak, when to listen, and when to act quietly, using her intelligence and insight to maintain both her safety and her autonomy. She realized that people were rarely simple, and that understanding their complexities could be a powerful tool in protecting herself and achieving her goals. By the end of this stage of her journey, Emily had begun to transform from a frightened, passive girl into a thoughtful, strategic young woman. She had learned to balance obedience with independence, caution with courage, and observation with action. She understood her environment, recognized her own strength, and began to see that her future was not predetermined. Every small decision, every careful observation, and every learned skill added to her growing sense of empowerment. Emily's life at the ranch had changed profoundly. What had once been a world of uncertainty and fear had become a place of learning, growth, and preparation. She had discovered reserves of courage, intelligence, and resilience she had never known existed, and as she looked out over the wide fields, feeling the wind on her face and the earth beneath her feet, she knew that she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer merely surviving. She was preparing, planning, and building the foundation for a future that was truly her own. As the months passed, Emily's confidence grew quietly but steadily. She had learned to anticipate Jacob's moods, navigate the chores with skill, and maintain a careful balance between obedience and independence. But her growing awareness of her own strength also came with a sense of urgency. She knew that her time at the ranch, though safe in many ways, could not last forever. She longed for freedom, not just freedom from the routine of the ranch, but the freedom to make her own choices, to shape her own future, and to live without fear of being controlled. Emily began to take subtle, deliberate steps toward preparing for a life beyond the ranch. She observed every detail, the layout of the property, the routines of the animals, and the patterns of Jacob's day. She found quiet corners where she could write, think, and plan, using small notebooks she had brought from home. Each observation added to her understanding of the ranch, helping her anticipate when she could move safely and when she needed to be cautious. Every chore she completed successfully strengthened her sense of independence, showing her that she could rely on herself, even in difficult circumstances. One day, Clara arrived with a careful smile and a small bag of supplies. "Emily," she whispered, "I think it's time to start thinking about what you need to do. You have the skills, the courage, and the knowledge. Now you need a plan." Emily's heart raced. She had thought about escape in vague terms, but hearing it spoken aloud made the idea more concrete and more real. She realized that she could no longer wait passively. She had to act, but with thought, patience, and care. Together, Emily and Clara discussed possibilities, carefully considering risks and safety. They spoke in whispers beneath the oak tree, away from prying eyes, discussing how Emily could safely leave the ranch, where she could go, and how she could protect herself during the process. Emily's mind was alive with calculations: which routes were least traveled, which neighbors might notice something unusual, and how she could carry enough supplies without drawing attention. Clara reminded her to be patient, to act slowly and deliberately, and to trust her instincts. Emily also began to prepare herself emotionally. She knew that leaving would not be easy. Jacob was unpredictable, and though he had moments of kindness, she could not ignore the fact that he held authority over her life. She steeled herself to remain calm and composed, knowing that fear or hesitation could jeopardize her plan. She practiced moving quietly around the ranch, observing his habits, and identifying moments when she could act without being noticed. Each small preparation strengthened her confidence, making her realize that courage was not about recklessness. It was about careful, thoughtful action. The first real opportunity came on a crisp, clear morning. Jacob had ridden into town to fetch supplies, leaving Emily alone with the animals. She moved with careful precision, attending to her chores while also mentally rehearsing the steps she would take if the chance to leave arose. She felt a mix of fear and determination, but she reminded herself of the life she longed for, the freedom to make choices, to reconnect with her family, and to pursue her dreams. This vision gave her courage, allowing her to act decisively when the moment arrived. Emily quietly packed a small bag with essentials: food, water, a few clothes, and her notebook. She left a careful note explaining her plans, not for Jacob, but as a reminder to herself of her purpose and her courage. Then, moving silently, she made her way to a secluded path she had discovered weeks before. Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the trail, each sound magnified in the still morning air. She reminded herself to stay calm, to focus on the steps she had planned, and to trust in her own abilities. As she walked through the fields, Emily felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. The familiar sights of the ranch became both comforting and confining, reminders of everything she had learned and everything she was leaving behind. She thought of her family, of Clara, and of all the small victories that had prepared her for this moment. With each step, she felt a growing sense of empowerment, the knowledge that she was finally taking control of her own life. When she reached the edge of the property, Emily paused to survey the surrounding landscape. She had studied maps, observed neighboring farms, and noted the safest routes. Carefully, she followed the path that led toward a nearby town where she knew a trusted relative lived. The journey was not without challenges. She had to navigate uneven terrain, avoid roads where people might notice her, and remain vigilant for any unexpected obstacles. Each step required focus, courage, and patience, but Emily found that her months of preparation had given her the skills she needed to move confidently and safely. Along the way, she encountered small tests of her resolve. A sudden gust of wind threatened to scatter her supplies, and she had to act quickly to secure them. She heard the distant sound of a horse and ducked behind a cluster of trees until she was sure it was safe. Each challenge, though minor, reminded her that freedom was not easily won. But with each obstacle she overcame, her confidence grew, reinforcing the belief that she could succeed. Finally, after hours of careful walking, Emily arrived at the small town where her relative lived. She was exhausted, hungry, and relieved. The warmth of a familiar home, the smell of food, and the sight of a welcoming face were overwhelming after so many months of tension and preparation. Her relative embraced her tightly, listening in disbelief and relief as Emily recounted her journey and the careful planning that had brought her safely to this point. For the first time in months, Emily felt a sense of safety that went beyond mere survival. She felt secure, supported, and free. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to rebuild her life. She attended school to continue her education, worked part-time to contribute to her living expenses, and reconnected with friends she had left behind. Each day was a step toward normalcy, but also a step toward the future she had long imagined. She discovered that her experiences at the ranch, while challenging, had given her resilience, resourcefulness, and a deep understanding of herself and the world around her. These qualities became the foundation of her new life, shaping the young woman she was becoming. Emily's journey was not without reflection. She thought often about Jacob, the man who had been a complex presence in her life. She did not harbor anger or hatred, but she understood that her strength had grown in part because of the challenges she had faced at the ranch. She realized that people were complex, that life could be difficult and unfair, but that courage, intelligence, and careful planning could create opportunities even in constrained circumstances. As time passed, Emily began to see her experience in a new light. She understood that her journey had been about more than escaping a place. It had been about discovering herself, learning her own strength, and realizing that she could shape her own destiny. She had taken what seemed like a powerless situation and turned it into an opportunity for growth, demonstrating resilience and courage that would guide her for the rest of her life. By the end of this chapter of her life, Emily had transformed from a frightened, dependent girl into a young woman capable of independent thought, careful planning, and courageous action. She had faced fear with determination, navigated uncertainty with intelligence, and embraced the possibility of a brighter future. The lessons she had learned at the ranch, patience, observation, resilience, and courage, would remain with her forever, shaping her character and her decisions in ways she could not yet fully imagine. Emily's journey was far from easy, but it was profoundly empowering. She had discovered the importance of self-reliance, the value of careful planning, and the strength that comes from facing challenges head-on. She had taken control of her own destiny, proving that even in the most difficult circumstances, courage and intelligence could create a path to freedom and opportunity. And as she settled into her new life, surrounded by people who loved and supported her, Emily knew that she had not only escaped a restrictive environment, she had grown into someone who could face the world with confidence, determination, and hope. She was no longer defined by fear or circumstance. She was defined by her courage, her resilience, and the choices she had made to take control of her own life. After months of uncertainty, Emily finally began to feel the steady rhythm of a life she could call her own. Each day brought a new sense of freedom and possibility, a relief she had never known while living at the ranch. Waking up without the weight of constant observation or rules, she could breathe, think, and plan her future. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe, not just physically, but emotionally. She realized that freedom was more than just leaving a place. It was reclaiming the ability to make choices for herself, to act on her desires, and to live without fear. Emily reconnected with her family slowly, sharing her experiences carefully and explaining the steps she had taken to ensure her safety. Her parents were both relieved and proud, recognizing how much courage and determination their daughter had shown. They listened with wonder as she recounted the months she had spent learning, observing, and preparing, understanding that her journey had been as much about inner strength as it was about survival. Her younger brother hugged her tightly, excited to have her back, and Emily realized that being home again gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to build a life that would honor both herself and the family who had supported her in difficult times. School became a new beginning. Emily was older than most of her classmates, but she embraced the opportunity to learn. She discovered a love for reading, writing, and problem-solving that she had never had the chance to explore fully before. Her experiences at the ranch had given her patience, focus, and resilience, qualities that proved invaluable in her studies. Teachers noticed her determination and her thoughtful approach to challenges. Emily began to excel academically, not just because she wanted to succeed, but because she had developed a deep understanding of the value of effort, preparation, and perseverance. Friendships blossomed as well. Emily reconnected with old friends and made new ones, sharing parts of her life carefully, only revealing what she felt safe sharing. She discovered the importance of trust and communication, learning to build relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. The friendships she cultivated helped her feel connected, supported, and valued. She realized that life was richer when shared with others, and that her experiences had given her insight and empathy that few of her peers could understand. Emily also began to think about her future in a broader sense. She considered careers, education, and opportunities to help others. She remembered Clara's encouragement, the conversations that had helped her see that life could be more than just survival. With each passing day, Emily became more confident in her ability to make choices for herself, to pursue dreams she had once thought impossible, and to contribute positively to the world around her. She understood that her past did not define her, but that her response to it shaped her present and her future. While her days were filled with learning, work, and new experiences, Emily also devoted time to reflection. She wrote in journals, expressing her thoughts, her fears, and her hopes. Writing became a tool for understanding herself, processing her emotions, and clarifying her goals. She often revisited memories of her time at the ranch, not with anger or fear, but with a sense of understanding. She recognized the lessons she had learned, the value of patience, observation, courage, and careful planning, and saw how those lessons had prepared her for a future she could shape herself. Emily's healing process was gradual. She sought guidance from mentors, counselors, and trusted adults who could help her navigate the emotional aftermath of her experiences. She learned that healing was not about forgetting the past, but about integrating it into her life in a way that strengthened her, rather than held her back. Each session, each conversation, each moment of reflection helped her feel more in control of her emotions, more confident in her decisions, and more prepared for the opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. As time went on, Emily discovered a passion for helping others who faced challenges similar to hers. She began volunteering with local youth programs, mentoring young girls, and sharing her story in ways that were empowering rather than frightening. She realized that her journey, difficult as it had been, could inspire others and provide hope to those who felt powerless. Emily found purpose in guiding others, helping them recognize their own strength and resilience. This work gave her a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced, turning her past hardships into a source of empowerment and inspiration. Emily also strengthened her independence in practical ways. She learned to manage finances, navigate transportation, and balance responsibilities with personal goals. Each small success reinforced her confidence and reminded her that she had the skills, intelligence, and determination to live fully and autonomously. She was no longer defined by fear or dependence. She was defined by her ability to act, to think, and to create a meaningful life for herself. In the midst of her new life, Emily experienced a moment of profound realization. One afternoon, while walking through a park with friends, she noticed a family playing nearby, laughter filling the air. For a moment, she felt a pang of sadness, remembering her own family's struggles. But then she looked at herself, standing strong, independent, and capable. She realized that she had come a long way, not just physically or geographically, but emotionally and spiritually. She had transformed fear into courage, uncertainty into strategy, and isolation into connection. The unexpected ending of Emily's journey was not a dramatic twist, but a quiet triumph. She did not simply survive, she thrived. She took what could have been a story defined by hardship and turned it into one defined by resilience, courage, and growth. Emily's life became a testament to the power of inner strength, careful planning, and the support of trusted friends and family. She had faced fear, navigated uncertainty, and reclaimed control of her destiny. In time, Emily pursued higher education, studying subjects that allowed her to help others, such as social work, psychology, or community development. She traveled, explored new opportunities, and built relationships that were healthy, respectful, and supportive. Each step she took was guided by the lessons she had learned at the ranch: patience, observation, resilience, and courage. She understood that life was not about avoiding challenges, but about facing them with intelligence, empathy, and determination. Emily's story became one of inspiration for her community. People admired her ability to overcome adversity, to learn from difficult experiences, and to create a meaningful, independent life. She shared her story with care, emphasizing hope, resilience, and the importance of believing in oneself. Through her actions and words, she encouraged others to recognize their own strength, to trust in their abilities, and to understand that even in the most challenging circumstances, there is the potential for growth and empowerment. In the end, Emily had achieved something remarkable. She had faced uncertainty, fear, and challenges beyond what most people her age could imagine. Yet through careful planning, observation, and inner courage, she had transformed her life. She had found safety, freedom, and independence, and she had used her experiences to help and inspire others. Emily had turned a story that could have been defined by hardship into a story defined by resilience, hope, and triumph. Looking back, Emily realized that every step of her journey had taught her something invaluable.